Every project I create is unique, a work of art, an expression of individual creative skill and imagination. The process for custom design is just like other mediums. I'm not merely delivering a product. I'm using my own talents to speak. And new technology simply means new tools to do so. Colors, layouts, fonts, every decision matters. With custom design, there's an undeniable relationship between creator and creation. This art, my art, is a form of speech. That's why the Constitution protects expression, with or without words. And to think that the government, who's supposed to protect speech, could compel or even censor it is a denial of our fundamental rights. As an artist, if the government can force me to violate my beliefs, they can force anyone.
Good afternoon. My name is Lance Bauslaugh. I'm the Senior Vice President of Development at Alliance Defending Freedom, and I want to welcome you this afternoon to an exciting conversation we're going to have with ADF's CEO, President, and General Counsel, Kristen Waggoner, and joining her, the woman at the heart of the 303 case, because that's what we're here to talk about. We're going to talk about celebrating what God's done through the 303 creative case, is a graphic artist and web designer, Lorie Smith, the owner of 303 Creative. Welcome. How are you both doing?
I'm so happy to be here. What an honor.
We love having you here, Lorie.
Thank you.
I'm doing great.
Kristen, I expected a woohoo.
A woohoo.
All right, well, let's start with you, Kristen. Congratulations. We've been waiting a long, long time for the Supreme Court to weigh in on this critical issue. What went through your mind when that decision came down?
Well, Lorie could talk about how weird it is when the Supreme Court rules, and sort of the way we do it is we're all on a Zoom call. You'd think it would be like really spectacular, right? Because we waited from December, it's the end of June, and we're literally on a Zoom call, hitting refresh on SCOTUS blog to see what the court's doing and waiting for the one word, which is reversed. And so once I heard that, I was just filled with relief. And as soon as the decision popped up, I immediately turned my camera off because I didn't want the whole team.
Don't do it.
It meant a lot. And I think it just to know that it was a dozen years in the making, and to see so many, there were a lot more downs than there were ups in that decade. And to just see God be so faithful to Lorie, but also so faithful to so many other people. I mean, so many people played a role in it, and so many people got caught in the crosshair. So to see the kind of ruling we got was just an answer to prayer. It was relief.
Relief. So what did the court say? We know it was a win. What did the court say?
The court essentially reaffirmed a time-honored principle that is very simple and very clear, and it is simply that the government does not have the power to force people to say things that they don't believe. It's a very simple principle, and it's one that the court has followed throughout free speech jurisprudence for many, many years, even dating back 80 years ago in a case called Barnett, where we can talk about what Barnett meant, but that also was a culturally significant moment. It was World War II, and the court protected free speech that wasn't popular in that moment. And so what the court did in Lorie's case was say all those principles that you all agreed to way back there, that the First Amendment and the Constitution require, they still apply, and they apply in this cultural moment. And thankfully, 6 justices said that that was true. We'll talk later about the 3 that didn't, because I think that's concerning.
Well, I believe you have a favorite line. What was your favorite line coming out of the
I do. Well, I brought it because I haven't had time to memorize it yet. I mean, I can tell you the first line of it is, tolerance, not coercion, is our nation's answer. And so the court's decision starts out with, at the end, but tolerance, not coercion, is our nation's answer. The First Amendment envisions the United States as a rich and complex place where all persons are free to think and speak as they wish, not as the government demands. Because Colorado seeks to deny this promise, the judgment is reversed. That is my favorite part of the decision. But there are so many great parts of it. I mean, we are encouraging every American to read it because it takes you through free speech jurisprudence, as I said, dating all the way back 80 years ago to all the seminal cases. And just again says that these time-honored principles don't just apply to people or speech that we like. It applies to everyone.
That's powerful. I love that you're encouraging everyone to read the decision. That I think, well, I'll take that challenge up, right? And put that even in front of my kids. Because when I think about the fact that I've got 4 kids and the generational impact and the stand, it's pretty powerful. Thinking about every American, regardless of their beliefs or whether they agree with Lorie, they should be celebrating this decision. Tell us, what really would the world look like without 303 Creative?
Well, and that's what I referenced. The 3 justices that joined the dissent that was written by Justice Sotomayor, essentially they said that no, it's okay now for the government to punish people because they won't say things that they believe to be false. And that's a very different world than we're living in right now. It's one where the government has essentially unchecked authority, where you can live in essentially a totalitarian regime because the government decides and mandates orthodoxy, and it is a world in which the government tells us what to think and what to say. And we know that as political and cultural winds shift throughout history, and so it's shocking to me that 3 of our justices abandoned those time-honored principles in this moment, not realizing that future moments may come and they may need that protection as well.
Yeah. Definitely.
And it also, I should say, Lorie's case is about her particular beliefs on same-sex marriage and whether she has to design custom websites that violate her convictions. But think of all the hot-button issues, the controversial topics that are out there right now. This decision, according to the dissent, you could force an LGBT website designer to have to speak a message that violates her convictions, or someone who's pro-abortion, a pro-abortion photographer, to have to take part in a pro-life rally. So there really is no limit to the kind of coercion that they would allow the government to enter into.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. Lorie, how's it feel to have won your case after 7 years?
That's a really difficult question for me to answer because I can't find the words. I am incredibly grateful and just at a loss, honestly. I still feel like I might be in a little bit of shock, certainly celebrating this incredible victory after 7 very, very, very long years. Yeah. 7 years where we lost and lost and lost and lost and then won, and won big. I am incredibly grateful that the court, our highest court in the nation, has affirmed that the government can't force anyone to say something they don't believe. This is huge. This is not just a victory for Lorie Smith and 303 Creative. This is a victory for each and every one of us.
Yeah. Well, are you excited to finally be designing wedding sites?
Of course I am. I've waited seven very long years, like I said. I was always hopeful from the beginning of this that this would be resolved at the lowest level. But here we are. I've missed a lot of wedding seasons, but I'm looking forward to the next and creating freely and consistently with my belief on marriage. I want to design and create wedding websites that celebrate God's view of marriage, and I want to do that without being punished, and now I can.
And now you can. How awesome. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the journey, and we had dinner last night, and we were talking a little bit about just what y'all have been going through, and I know death threats, harassment, even lies, they've been escalated in ways that you maybe weren't even prepared for. But speak a little bit about the impact on your family.
Well, this has always been a family decision, and my family has been incredible and has walked alongside me every step of the way this last 7 years. And I'll be honest, it's been very difficult. Yes, I was prepared for some backlash. This is not new to me. Over the last 7 years, I've experienced quite a bit of backlash, but the last week and a half has been really difficult at times. You alluded to death threats. We're at a point where I'm not comfortable with my 11-year-old playing out front for the fear that someone could drive by and carry out some of these threats that I've received. What's heartbreaking about this is those people who are sending the threats and sending the messages and inundating my inbox and website. I'm standing to protect something that they benefit from. So it's heartbreaking. But I'm grateful for the community of people who have surrounded my family and just covered us in prayer. It's meant a lot to me, especially in these last few days.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know you've also expressed if you could visit with some of these people, sit down, have a cup of coffee, what would you share with them?
I would love that opportunity. We have lost the ability to disagree civilly and to do so face to face. So many of the threats I've received have been over social media or email, and I long to have conversations with people on this topic. What I would say is this, that we very well may disagree on the topic of marriage, but a simple disagreement does not equal discrimination. And what the court has upheld is everyone's right to speak consistent with what they believe. The LGBT website designer, the Democrat speechwriter, the Jewish calligrapher, the pro-life photographer. All of us should be free to create and speak consistent with what we believe. This is the core of our peaceful society. And I think about how grave the implications could be if the court had not ruled the way it did.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're willing to have those conversations and just, those hard conversations. And so often when we go into relationship with one another, we're able to have those conversations. Would you do this again?
Yes. Without hesitation, I would. Because I'm a mother, I have a daughter, and I know that if I want freedom for myself, that I need to stand and protect it for others. And I think about the future generations who will be growing up, and they may have different views on marriage. Perhaps they grow up to be website designers or graphic designers who want to create consistent with their convictions. Because of this ruling, because of the stand for freedom, they'll be able to do that without being punished.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned 11-year-old. I have a 10-year-old who will almost be 11 in another couple months, and I just totally relate. Thank you for standing up for generations to come. Thank you for standing up for my kids. Kristen, speaking of everyone speaking freely, I know I've had this question asked of me several times, and I'm sure it's on everyone else's mind. How does this decision impact other ADF cases? So thinking of, how will this help Jack Phillips, Emily Carpenter, Chelsea Nelson, and others?
Well, I think it will help all of them, and it will help far beyond even the creative professional cases. The ruling is very broad, and sometimes you'll hear people say, I wish it was 9-0 or 8-1. Well, let me just tell you, I don't wish that. I mean, ideally in a perfect world, if they could all rule the right way, that would be great. But we're not in that world. And so when we have a 6-3 decision, we have a broader decision that is more protective of free speech than if we'd had a 9-0 decision, because it's just too hard to get them to agree on broad issues. So we're thrilled with the breadth of the decision, and with Emily Carpenter, for example. She's a photographer and a blogger in the Second Circuit at the Court of Appeals. And as soon as the court ruled in 303, the court asked for supplemental briefing to say, how does this ruling apply to Emily? Emily faces potentially jail time for declining to create custom photographs and blogs that celebrate a view of marriage that violates her convictions. So it's not just Colorado's fines and re-education that it provides, but other jurisdictions actually impose jail time and 6-figure penalties and the loss of your business license. And in addition to Emily, we have Chelsea Nelson, which is in the 6th Circuit. She's a photographer. We have Bob Updegrove in the 4th Circuit in Virginia. His case is pending. And there are a number of other implications. And of course, we have Jack Phillips's 3rd case. So I think that this decision will help all of them. In some cases, it will be completely conclusive. In other cases, it will, I think, in the end, prove that we win the case once we establish that speech is involved. Because the court says that if you are being forced to speak and you're making your decisions based on what the message is and not who the person is, the government has no business telling you what to do.
Okay, you mentioned it's a broad ruling, so even broadly, more broadly than even the folks we just talked about, how does this impact the rest of the free speech work that ADF is working on?
Well, it's interesting. As I've been at ADF for about 10 years now, we've had these centers that exist at ADF that focus on certain areas of the law. But as the time has passed, we have seen every single center now is having to deal with issues of censorship. So it could be in the parental rights sector, it could be in business owners with creative professionals or businesses more broadly, certainly in the Church and Ministry Alliance context. The students in terms of public campuses, they are all dealing with censorship of some kind. And this decision is broad enough that it touches on every single one of those cases. We can think of examples like Brian Tingley. His petition is at the U.S. Supreme Court right now, and we expect that the court will either grant cert or will potentially summarily reverse the decision because Brian is being compelled to, or censored, and he can't allow and counsel others who are struggling in different areas because the government says you can't help someone who's experiencing gender dysphoria and help them live at peace with their bodies, but you can help them transition. Well, that's all kinds of ways to Sunday violates the Constitution. This decision will help that. Maggie DeYoung, who's a student, for example, her case is pending and a no-contact order was issued against her simply because she articulated conservative and religious viewpoints in the classroom. It's going to help her as well. There are just many different cases that will be impacted because of the censorship that government officials and activists are trying to impose on conservative and religious individuals.
A lot of work to be done. A lot of work to leverage moving
but
forward.
it's so great to have a tool that is such a strong tool in our toolbox. We've been waiting so long for the court to reaffirm these principles.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I know there's been a lot made about this case post-decision, and despite this victory that benefits everyone, regardless of their belief, their persuasion, their identity, there have been some malicious and desperate attempts to delegitimize the court. Sorry, I'm having a hard time with that word. The decision, and even ADF, and I know it's really struck to the core. I'd like for you to kind of set the record straight on a couple things, if you wouldn't mind. So first, does Lorie deny service to people who identify as LGBT?
No, she has LGBT clients. Those who identify as LGBT, she's happy to serve. And the case is based on stipulated facts. You may have read about that, which means that the facts are agreed to, but they're also true. And that's an important part of this whole case. And again, the court made very clear that Lorie's decisions are based on what the message is that she's being asked to create, not who the person is that is requesting it. And she's more than happy to work with people from all walks of life, and does.
Yes. Will this case allow people to be discriminated against or denied goods or services?
No, it does not. And the court, again, reaffirmed what has existed for many, many decades. Public accommodation, non-discrimination laws have coexisted with the First Amendment for many, many decades, and they continue to exist. The court affirmed those principles and said you can't be discriminated against because of a protected classification. But you also, or I should say, and you also cannot be compelled by the government to speak a message that violates your convictions.
Yeah. Well, how about this? Was this case made up? I think we've heard that quite a bit. Has standing ever been in question?
I just can't even believe that they went there. The idea that it's made up. You tell me how you can make up a case when you have Jack Phillips in 2012, who has been aggressively prosecuted by Colorado in 2 different cases. Lorie's in Colorado. She's getting a front row seat to this kind of aggressive enforcement and the punishment that she's faced with, and suggests somehow this is a fake case. More importantly, Lorie has repeatedly expressed that there's a credible threat, that credible threat is also in her case. And for 7 years, Colorado never disavowed enforcement of this law. For 7 years, Colorado had the opportunity to say, nothing to see here, but instead what Colorado said is, let's go. Let's go fight this out because we think we can compel her to speak. And it's a pre-enforcement challenge, which is a staple of civil rights law. All you have to show to have standing is a credible threat of enforcement. And she has one of the strongest cases ever. So we're right on the law, but I also want to address this fact issue because this one really ticked me off. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. This is the first time I really got it.
The floor is yours.
The suggestion, they made much ado about the fact that Lorie had a request for a same-sex wedding, and they suggested that that request was made up because they said the person that made the request now says he didn't make it some 7 years ago. Well, first of all, he did make it, or we believe that he made it, because it came in, and IT data confirms, it came in through Lorie's website, a request for a same-sex wedding, and they said, we may stretch to a website, we want this, we want that, and it came from Mike and Stuart. I mean, it's just undisputed that this happened. So for them to pull this out now at the last minute and call for the disbarment of the lawyers, call Lorie a liar, just shows you how desperate they are and how important this ruling is to protect Americans. Sorry, you just asked. And I would say for those who are listening, the Wall Street Journal.
Yes.
Finally, we got an op-ed refuting these allegations in detail in the Wall Street Journal, and that is in today's paper. And I would encourage everyone listening to look at that. It was a privilege to partner with Aaron Hawley, who also was co-counsel with me in that, and to get that published. And it explains all the legal reasons and the factual reasons that this is totally bogus.
And you may have just kind of touched on this, but really lastly, what do you make of the efforts to delegitimize the decision itself?
It's disappointing. It's sad that we can't affirm the principles that have served this nation so well for so many years simply because of the cultural moment we're in. And so disheartening to see that 3 justices essentially ignored the law in that way. But I also think it's encouraging then that we do have some justices on the court who recognize and will stand in this cultural moment to protect the First Amendment and to again say whether speech is popular or not, whether you agree with it or not, is irrelevant to whether you have protection from the government. And the First Amendment is a golden rule. Whatever speech you protect for yourself, you have to protect it for those who oppose you. And thankfully, the court affirmed that soundly.
That's awesome. I want you to know that we're so grateful for your courage and your leadership as you have led. You mentioned at the beginning of this conversation 12 years in the making to get to this ruling, but there's so much more behind the scenes. And when you talk about the whole alliance coming together around this, there's so many people, hundreds of people. But your courage and your leadership, thank you, Kristen, as we celebrate this victory. Last question for you in our conversation today is, as our listeners are watching this and they're taking away this case and we move on, you know, the next day's coming and the next week's coming and the next case is coming, what's one thing about the 303 creative decision, maybe right now as they're going to backyard cookouts, as they're talking to families, that they should be talking with their friends and family about? What's one thing that you want them to remember and begin to converse about?
Well, it's hard to say one, so I'm going to say 2. I think that the 2 key components of this to help people understand is, 1, first of all, free speech has to apply to everyone and all the reasons why it's so important to protect it. We have to have the right to be able to think and to speak. That is, words are primarily how we expose lies, how we debate, how we make social progress, how we change the course of history. And if the government can tell us what we think and what we speak, we lose that freedom. We lose the very ability to engage in self-government. And yet we see the younger generation not necessarily recognizing the importance of it in this moment. So that's the one thing. I think the second thing is, just because you disagree on an issue doesn't mean that you hate someone. It doesn't mean that you're engaging in disagreement or discrimination. What matters here is what the message is. And if there is an objection to what you're being asked to speak, the government has no business interfering in that decision. And that was the crux of this decision. So it protects all of us. And one of the things I think, another op-ed to look at that was published just a couple days ago in Bloomberg was with Nadine Strawson. She and I co-wrote an op-ed. She's the former president of the ACLU. And again, we disagree on so many issues, but we recognize that even though we have ideological differences, we need the ability to be able to articulate those differences and not have the government put its thumb on the scale.
That's good. I love how this case is clarifying so much there, and it's giving me as a father the opportunity to talk to my kids and help explain, hey, you have these rights. You have the ability to go and live and speak this way. So I so appreciate that, Kristen. Your boldness, Lorie, your courage, your willingness to take a stand. And I know we've done different events, and you've talked about just the need to be able to stand, not just for you and not for your daughter, but for everyone. And again, I mentioned, my kids and their ability to be able to live their faith in their life. We're so grateful for you, and grateful not just for your courage and your boldness, but for your sweet spirit, the way that you've approached this and the way that you will continue to approach this, the willingness to talk to anyone who wants to talk to you and explain who Jesus is and explain your faith. I would love to just finish with you as you think about the impact of this and you think about this journey that you've walked along. Do you have any kind of final words for our audience? Anything you'd love to just impart upon them?
I think I'll start by saying that I really don't think that my courage is unique, that I have hope for our nation, and that my courage started from watching others who had courage. And that's encouraged me throughout these 7 years, through the hills and valleys and all that has come with this journey. And I've had people say to me in the past, Lorie, I could have never taken this leap of faith. To which I've really struggled with that comment, because this is a step. I think that this began with one step 7 years ago. The Lord calling me to something, and then to having the courage in one step to say, okay, I will abide and I'll trust in you, Father. One day at a time, and one step led to the next, to the next, to the next. And 7 years later, here we are. So I just like to encourage, if you are hearing my voice right now, to just encourage my brothers and sisters in Christ to take that next step, whatever that might be. There's no coincidence that we are here for such a time as this. And our culture needs us. The backlash that I received in the last 2 weeks is evident that our culture needs light and needs hope, and they're seeking hope. Do we have enough courage to step out in boldness? It might cost us our careers, our name, a Google search. Don't ever Google search my name, by the way. It might very well cost us something, but do we have the courage to take the next step, not knowing where we could be in 7 years? So I hope that my testimony encourages others to step out in boldness, to seek God's will and count on his favor, and then to step back after 7 incredible years in an act of humility to just say, thank you, Father, thank you, Jesus. I have gained a family, a support system. And at the end of the day, our Father's glorified. I wouldn't change it for a minute.
I love that. The bold step. I receive your challenge.
Good. One step at a time.
Hey, amen. Thank you so much, Lorie. Thank you, Kristen, for spending this time today to talk about this victory. I know as we get further away, we'll have more reflections, but we are just praising the Lord for this moment and how he has worked through your obedience and through your obedience. We want to thank you for joining us for this conversation today as we celebrate what God's done through 303 Creative. I want to challenge everyone watching to do 2 things. To listen to what Lorie challenged us with and just take that next step of obedience in your life. And then Kristen challenged us a little while ago to read this decision. And I would love for you to go and read this decision. We're so grateful for what this case means. And it means free speech for everyone. Everyone. Thank you for supporting the ministry through your gifts, through your prayers, through your partnership. We love you, and we just ask that you would have a great afternoon.